Can you hear me? Hola. Houston, you copy? Okay, thank you. So, again, welcome to this morning session of our seminar, last one. So the good news is this is the last time you will hear anything from me, at least for this edition of the seminar. And yesterday we interrupted while we were talking about the pseudo-Aristotelian work on things heard, Peria Guston, whose authorship is disputed, as we have seen, and we saw that the author, whoever it was, explains how the stable and temporary conditions of the main parts of the phonatory apparatus, which are, of course, the windpipe and the larynx, can affect, and the lung as well, can affect the vocal output in terms of quality of the voice. And here in the handout, you can see a kind of synopsis of the overall structure of the work. And as you can see, there is a catalog of types of voice which overlaps in some way with the types of voices we have heard about yesterday in Maria Urso's papers. So this kind of reflection on voice was both musical and it grew out of a medical interest as well, as it seems. So we have clear voices, bright, surface, non-bright. Then the usage of color, again, gray and white. And to illustrate these characteristics of this kind of voices, the author often makes references to the sound of the aulos, which is something we have also found in medical literature. Hard voices, sclerai, and in the middle of this series of types of voices, we have some digressions, which are not always strictly related to the main topic. Some of them seem to be kind of out of place, and if one removes them, the list of types of voices seem to flow more naturally, which might indicate that perhaps the text has been tampered with or altered in some way, either by Porphyry, who is our source, or Porphyry's sources. We are in no position to say. Then we have hard voices, rough, archaeis, thin or thick, reptile or archaei, and then again thin and dense, shrill, figurai, phonai. Then other characteristics of voice which are not related to timbre directly, but are more defects or vices in the emission of voice. Cracked voices, broken voices, sastrai, parere, And in this case, the quality of these voices is explained by means of comparisons to pottery, broken pieces of pottery, and the sound obtained by adding horn resonators to the body of the alloy, and also with strings whose structure is not perfectly even. Because as we know, when ancient music theorists talked about the usage of strings for theoretical purposes, for example, in the monochord or other kinds of canonies, which are not necessarily monochords, but can be multi-stringed canonies as well. Because, as you know, the monochord is a particular case of an instrument that can have more than one single chord. Ptolemy speaks about 8 stringed canonies or even 15 stringed canonies. But anyway, when they talk about strings, they refer to a theoretical model of a string which is perfectly even and maintains the same density and the same thickness or thinness throughout its entire length, which is of course a theoretical construction, because in real world it's very difficult to have that kind of string. And in this case, for broken voices, the author speaks about uses the resemblance to a string which is not perfectly even. And then other flowed voices, so windy and smooth voices, the sei, psilai, and then the work ends with an affirmation of broken voices again, and with mention of stammerers. The third is focused on ways in which voices and variety, human voices in particular, are perceived. So, all these adjectives, all these characterization of voice are meant to describe how these voices sound to the listener. There is no indication that these are intrinsic qualities of voices per se, but the way we perceive them, which is very Aristotelian. Musical instruments and other non-musical sound sources are recalled for the sole purpose of clarifying the discourse on the voice. There are also indications that the voice is treated from different perspectives. In the majority of cases, the characteristics of the voices which are listed have to do with timbre, but not always. The so-called clear voices, for instance, are evidently defined by their timbre. But the clear chance, I think, that in the description of voices face, there is a reference to the clarity of tongos. This is a word which came up in Simone Veda's paper as well. And tongos is used in non-musical meaning, I mean, not non-Aristotelian meaning, so it's not used as a synonym for note, a musical sound which is individually recognizable, but has to do with the articulation of voice. So the ability of voice to make the single element of this speech, not only melody, because we are not in a strictly musical context here, it would be a spoken word, or speech. recognizable. These basic elements which constitute speech or melody are called tongoi. So, a voice could be lampra, could be bright, but not surface. There are different things because sapheia has to do with the ability of conveying meaning in the case of spoken word and distinguishing notes in the case of melody. This seems the best way to construct the word tongos in this context, for it cannot refer to musical notes in the expressive sense, as we see. The same can be said of another passage in the same word that 804b29, where we are told that the stutterer's tongue is unable to shift from a position to another when they need to utter different tones. Here we clearly are talking about spoken language. So the inability of the stutterers to speak properly is explained with the difficulty with which his tongue moves from one position to another in order to articulate different vowels or consonants. So we should take tongos as indicating those elements of speech which are most similar to notes in melody, which means the single vowels clear, separated from the preceding and subsequent ones by the accurate articulation of consonants. This ability to make use, an effective usage of consonants and vowels in speaking is what distinguishes the human voice, even in singing, from instruments. There is a problem in book 19 of the pseudo-Aristotelian problems, and the question there is why when we sing without words, the author called this teretizing, the result is unpleasant. People coming, singing without words, or with a closed mouth, or simply without articulating words. And this practice we are told that it is unpleasant from the point of view of the listener, on the part of the listener. And one of the reasons that the compiler of the problems offers is that when it comes to pure sound, alogos, without words, musical instruments are more effective than the human voice, because the musical instrument is meant to articulate different notes without, of course, words. So the musical instruments are more acoustica than human voice. They have for example, if I play the lyre, every note I play has a clear beginning because I have to pluck the string. So there is a clear beginning for every note. And when I play the aulos, I can use my tongue, my lips to articulate the sounds. I don't need words. But when I sing, if I don't sing consonants, the passage from one pitch to another, legato with just a vocal emission, vowel emission, without any clear passage between one pitch and the successive one, can be unclear. So this is not the ergon of the voice. The voice is not meant for that. So the compiler concludes that it's better to listen, to shut up and listen when you go to a concert or when you are listening to someone playing the violin or the guitar or someone singing. It's better to just listen instead of humming along with the singer because this is unpleasant and this is something which is inconvenient. It's not by chance, I think, that in Theophrastus's characters, you know, Theophrastus, among other things, wrote this very funny work, which is complete for us. We have the whole writing, where he describes a series of different types of persons, characters, and among these there is the unpleasant person, discaresse, the bothered type. And these different characters are illustrated by means of their actions, which is also very Aristotelian, because the ethos is illustrated by means of praxis, what people do. And in the case of the discaresse person, one of the things they usually do is to hum during concerts. And when there is an auditrice playing, he claps his hands out of rhythm in most inappropriate times, and he hums along. And so this is an example of how not to listen to music. I've always wondered if there is link, a relation between this kind of observation, which has to do with the behavior of people listening to music and not being part of the performance, and the shift in musical life, in musical culture, which, for example, Silvano was talking about the other day. Because when music becomes increasingly a profession, and there is a clear separation than in classical period between professionals who sing and play and the common audience who is just there to listen. This is a process that starts, for example, with Pericles' Odeon, which is a space made and projected for large crowds who are meant to listen to musical performance, but not to participate in it, passive kind of reception of music. In an aristocratic symposium in the classical period, people were at the same time performers and listeners, because in the Scholia, for example, when the aristocrats would meet at a table, in turn they sang their pieces, and then they listened to other aristocrats singing in turn. So the roles were mixed because there was this amateurship. There was no professionalism. But when musical professionalism increases, we have a few well paid and well known performers, and these crowds who want to listen to them. And in this sense, they become more passive than they were before. And so, humming along during a performance becomes something which should not be done, something which is frowned upon. I don't think, but I am also curious of what you feel about this. I don't think that it's by chance that these kind of remarks about how to listen in silence comes up at the threshold of the Hellenistic period. We don't have, to my knowledge, of course, but I might be wrong, but we don't have testimony that singing along with someone else is frowned upon in the classical period, to the best of my knowledge, of course. And going back to our short synopsis of the Day of the Virgus, and why being lamprey or grey or something else are typical characteristics, there are other things, other characterization of voice, which are defects, not things. And this could be said of the short passage on windy and smooth voices, where the word sonorous appears again, and what it describes here is not the quality of the voice per se, but rather the result of a certain way of speaking or perhaps singing. Nowadays, a singing teacher would probably consider a student's windy voice, so a voice in which you can hear the breath in expiring. During the expiration, you hear the breath together with voice. So there is an ability of manage your breath in order to just sing without letting your breath be heard. That would be considered as a technical flaw which would need correcting. The following section and final section of the work, which resumes the discussion of broken voices, also appears concerned with problems which might occur during a performance, either spoken, such as public speaking or acting, or sound. Finally, stammering is a speech disorder and has little or nothing at all to do with the quality of voice. It's something which affects the articulation of sound, not voice per se. So this, on the whole, the Daily Virgus appears to be a kind of a collection of diverse approaches to the voice, and this might be due to its intrinsic nature or to the fact that the word text, as we have it nowadays, has been altered, abridged, or adapted in some way. Anyway, if I would like to end this brief account of texts on voice with some remarks from the other section of the Aristotelian problems that deal with voice. Some problems we find in section 19, and in particular on difficulties and risks in singing. And I would like to draw your attention to this problem, number 37 from section 19. Why, though the high voice goes with small and the low goes with the large, since the low is low because of the large quantity of air, while the high is quick because of small quantity, it is more work, so it's more difficult. This is Robert Mayo translation. To sing high notes than to sing low notes. This, basically in ancient acoustics, there are different models, and sometimes they are opposed to each other. So basically, depending on what they want to show, authors tend to use one or the other one indifferently. And in one kind of model, which could be traced back to Archytas, as we have seen, high notes are high because of the force of the impact. So In this model, high sounds are connected with more, not with less, more force. But on the other hand, if we assume that a high note is similar to a missile, a javelin, something which is strong and which goes further, reaches farther than a low note because it's lighter and moves in a direct and linear way, whereas a low note occupies the space around and moves in a different way from a high note. If we make this assumption, the high note is high because it's smaller, and this is why it moves in that particular way. Uh, the two adjectives which are mainly used in Greek language to indicate high and low, oxus and barius, have to do with this kind of sensation, because oxus also means something with a spike, something that stings. And high notes stimulate our ear in a different way than lower ones. It's a kind of a punching feeling rather than a pressure feeling. So here, at the beginning of this problem, we have this model whereby high is associated with less, not with more. But the question arises, so if a high note is lighter, why is it more difficult to sing it than a low one? Indeed, few can sing the upper notes, and the orchianoi and the high one are difficult to sing because of the strain involved. Yet, it's less work to move a small quantity than to move a large one. And so it is with air as well. And then a possible explanation is introduced, or is being naturally high-voiced not the same as singing high notes? This is, in my opinion, this is a quite important passage because a distinction is made between what your natural voice is and how you are using the voice. Because, as you know, each of us has their own center in voice. When you go to a singing master, you want to learn how to sing, the first thing is to know what you are. Are you a soprano, a mezzo soprano, a tenor, a bass, and so on. And in order to ascertain that, your teacher has to find what your center is, and then around that center you can build your voice, you can find your voice, and so on. So you might have a naturally high voice, but this voice will have its own high notes and its own low notes, and the difficulty stays in singing what the notes which are high for you, for your particular voice. Rather, all naturally high voice things are so owing to weakness. And this links to what Anna Maria Russo said yesterday. That weak animals or weak humans are thought to have high voices. By not being able to move much air, but only a small quantity. And the small quantity travels fast, but in singing, the high is a sign of power. Because if you are able to sing high notes, this means that your voice is powerful. So, there is a difference between normal voice in normal life and voice in singing. For what is traveling violently travels quickly, which is why the high is sign of power. And this is why those in good health have high voices. As you can see, there is a kind of contradiction here, because first we have been told that it's the weak people who have high voices. Then we are told that high voices are a sign of power. And there's another problem in book 11, in which we are told that those who regularly work out, go to the gym, and are fit and healthy, have high voices because they emit the breath more violently because they are fit, they are strong. Couch potatoes, on the other hand, those who do not exercise have low voices because they are weak. But a few programs earlier, we have been told that those who are unable to generate children, so eunuchs and children and very old people, have high voices because they are weak. So as you can see, there is a kind of confusion here, contradiction here. And this, of course, is intrinsic to the nature of these problems because it's a collection of different, maybe minutes taken by disciples during discussion. This is the most commonly accepted theory about the origin of the collection of the problems, about while philosophers were discussing topics within the school of Aristotle, and these discussions were prescribed in the loose form of minutes. And then someone connected all these answer and question issues, topics in a different section. So there is no organic plan in this work. And this is why those in good health and voice, indeed, it's work to sing the upper notes, while the low ones are at the bottom. Therefore, this is a necessary integration of the text. Therefore, they are easier to sing. Another characteristic of this text is that they are very elliptic. Conclusions are often left to the reader, so it's quite difficult to translate them because we have to supply the part of the train of thought that are missing. And another interesting problem, in my view, this is perhaps one of the most fascinating problems about voice. And in section 19 is number 3 and 4, which is a rare case in which two subsequent problems are linked to each other, which is not at all common in this collection. So, it's about vocal break, which is the nightmare of every singer, both in the present and in the past. Why does vocal break occur with singing the pariupate, as well as the nete and the high notes, but with more distinction? Pariupate is a low note, whereas the nete is a high note. It is because this, which is the pariupate, is the most difficult to sing, and on top of that, it is where they start from. Maybe they start from means when they warm up, because it's otherwise we would need to assume that every melody started from the pariupate, which is of course it's absurd. On the other hand, the difficulty lies in the ascending movement and in the squeezing of the voice. In such things there is effort, and where there is an effort, there is more risk of damage. So here we have a description of what every singer knows, that when you go up in singing, when you reach what is your limit, your throat tends to squeeze. And this is where, in modern singing technique, the so-called passage intervenes. In order to go to the other register, there are techniques that singers learn, and which are meant to avoid this piercing text phonese, the squeezing of your voice when you reach the limit of your voice. And the second, the successes, the following problem follows in the same reason. Because, but why do people sing this? This is the paripate, most likely, with the figurative, while the hipate more easily. The hipate is one step down paripate. So, if why they are so close to each other, but the hipate is more easily sung than the paripate, yet between them there is only a diesis, so they are very close to each other. And then this is one of those cases in which the textual transmission is particularly cruel, because this part of the text is, philologically speaking, is a mess. Because Deigar metasunoias kai katastasios sopietatis toetei postenbulesin, this part is gravely damaged, and it's very difficult to understand what it means. But what we can gather is that usually melodies go from paripate to hipate by descending, and this makes it easier to sing that note. And this part is very interesting. After securing kai katastasios opiotates toetei prosperpulesin, after securing the hipate, after the singer has centered this note, it is easier to hit the high notes, because they have reached the fundamental note of the scale, so it's easier to think the other notes before singing. Which is a very interesting remark, because it seems to hint at the fact that in order to sing well, a singer should have a clear idea not only of the size of the interval he's about to sing, but of the general structure of the melody. Even in modern music, modern singing, it's easier to sing a particular interval if the singer has a clear idea of the melodic context. People do not sing single intervals when they sing. They sing shapes, like a static idea of the melody. This is the best way to avoid misintonation. And then, on misintonation, there are these problems which were already addressed in some paper, maybe yours. So I will skip them because Angela has already talked about them. And yes, so since it's almost 11, I think you have heard enough from me for this morning and for this seminar altogether. So I will stop here, and before you talk to Mariacarla, I will ask you if you have questions or remarks and so on.
Massimo, il paripate is the passage between the lower register and the higher register, right?
Paripate is near to the hipate, so it's a kind of low note.
Yes, and then when there is a passage, because there is a passage for example, in a mezzo soprano, there is a passage between la and do, and the VS6 you usually have a passage.
Ah, okay. So it might be the important point where
I
you.
think so.
Ah, that's interesting. Please.
It might be because you're jumping up an octave from hypate up to mete, which is a lot easier than major 7, jumping from part octave.
An octave. Yeah. Yes, because singing an octave is, yes, it's simple. There is a smile technique.
Yes, because for the lower notes, you've got a different position in your mask. And so when there is a passage, you need to address it in a very delicate way, managing the diaphragm in a way that it doesn't break the hair.
Oh, yes. It's very interesting that they try to put this into words. It's fascinating.
Yes.
Because in the history of singing techniques, is it possible to write a history of the passage? When it became, when do we have the first documentation, the first testimony about this kind of technique of the passage? Neither do I. That's why I think it's.
No, but it's really surprising for me because as a singer, I think that what is written there, even though it's sometimes kind of notes, it says notes in some shape of the problem. There is an awareness of the thing, which is very advanced. For example, the fact that the high voice is powerful, and when you are not in the maschera, the sound, the high voice is high, but it's weak because it's not in the.
You don't use your
resonance. You don't use cavities. You just use the hair in the nose, but you don't use this.
Yes, I think that our lack of knowledge in this respect is due to the fact that most of these practices were not written because the teaching of music in general and of singing in particular was something very imitative, so empirical, and it was not realized because it was deeply set of a lower degree of knowledge. It has nothing to do with philosophy or mathematical ratios. So we have to look for hints. Yes, in peripheral sources as well. But nonetheless, it's a fascinating thing. There's something I've always wondered. It seems that that ancient thinkers had a clear awareness that the singing voice is different from the speaking voice. And that's straightforward. Aristotle describes how it's different in terms of pitch, but in terms of emission. We have some hints of Aristotelian, not the work of Aristotle himself, but his followers, his continuators, disciples. And for example, in the definition of the diastematic phoneme, in Aristotelian literature, there are examples that other writers used to explain what the diastematic phoneme is in more trivial terms than Aristotle did. And we have these testimonies scattered, for example, in Porphyry, and there is the one of the tree, the log. Speaking voice is compared to just a tree. Tree has smallest branches and so on. But if a lightning bolt hits this tree and it tears it into pieces, this voice breaks into this continuous piece of wood breaks into discrete pieces. And these pieces are the notes. But it's classes. But in order for this to happen, there must be something violent, a lightning bolt. So, what makes your voice switch from the speaking mode to the singing mode is emotion, a strong emotion. Something, Aristotle says, dia pathos, which has been translated by accident, which is possible, but I incline to think that the meaning could be slightly different. So why someone stops speaking and starts singing? Because it's under the effect of some kind of emotion. But technically speaking, the passage from one mode to another implies the usage of the resonator we have in our body, in our face, in our... And I've always wondered if the verb which means singing, to sing, in Greek, has this particular structure that I do. You have three successive vowels, which are, no.
It's a vocalization.
It's a vocalization of something that makes you raise your tongue, i.e., there is a progression. And I have always wondered if this verb, in some ways, contain a kind of instruction to trigger this passage of the voice.
This is very practical. Yes.
I don't know because I've looked in etymological dictionary. I found nothing of that sort. So maybe it might be just my imagination. But I've always found very striking that in the first verb of Western literature, many I, they are, Peleria, Leo, etc. Something when a singer vocalizes in order to bring your voice, forward to go. I've heard singers use this kind of vocalization to trigger this switch toward the mask. So maybe I don't really know, but I find this quite fascinating. Okay, so I am relieved because I'm done with talking, and I'm very happy to introduce Mariacarla Giorgi, who is lecturer assistant in music history at the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Cultural Heritage and Dance in the University of Salento. So she's a colleague of ours. And she's a musicologist, and she specializes in Germany here, in musical biography at the University of Pavia, and he has completed a research fellowship in musicology at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Lecce, Germany, and he's a research fellow in musicology at the Deutsche Akademische Hausstammhistorie Bonn, and she studied ancient music under Martin West at the Oxford University. She also authored an Italian translation of Martin West's book, Ancient Music. Yes, and ancient music. And she has led a research project, Music and Politics in European Women's History of the 18th and 19th centuries, promoted by Comitato per la Salvaguardia dei Beni Culturali here in Lecce. And here her main research areas are ancient musical theory and its reception in the Renaissance, history of tonal theory from Viennese classicism to 20th century, history of European musical theatre from the Enlightenment to the late Romanticism, history of generally set music by female composer, because she's very, this is a field of research which is she's very fond of, so the female contribution to the history of music, female musical writings. And today she's going to talk about Greek notation and the art of singing in Renaissance treatises, Giovanni Battista Donis for Gymnastica Musicale. So please.
Thank you so much, Massimo. Thank you for your kind presentation. And I have to give you and Daniela Castaldo my heartfelt compliments for the fantastic organization and for the high level of all speakers and their contribution. It was very, I learned so much in the seminar. And yes, it's a pleasure for me to speak today about one of the most famous scholar and researcher on Greek music in the Renaissance, Giovanni Battista Doni. Giovanni Battista Doni Giovanni Battista Doni, born in 1594 in Florence, was one of the most erudite researchers and scholars of ancient Greek music, and studied the Greek sources of music from manuscripts in the original language, and not from the Latin translations that circulated during the Humanism and the Renaissance. Like May, Galilei, Niccolò Vicentino, Bardi, he tried to give an interpretation of the ancient modes and genera, starting from an in-depth study of the notation and the system of transposition of tonally into other tonally or modes. Doni was a philologist and scholar of music. We can think about him as our ancestor, a predecessor of MOISA, and well known for his work Commentari de Villa Barberina, in which he wrote all the results of his studies and experimentations on Greek instrumental music. As a result of his experimentations in adapting Greek tonally and modes to the music of his time, he designed and reproduced some models of transposing instruments adapted by him to the musical practice of his time and able to deal with the ancient modes and their transposition without difficulty. The most famous of these is the lyra called Barberina, in honor of Pope Barberini, Urban VIII, who has protected his studies. Claude Palisca, the most appreciated scholar of theorists of music in the Renaissance, studied the compendio del Trattato dei Generi e dei Modi and analyzed the theoretical interpretive system of Doni on harmonia, tonoi, and modes. But the treatises in which Doni tries to apply the Greek theory on scales and tonoi to vocal practice remain unexplored. In these works, his purpose was to develop a method to renew musical practice, especially vocal practice, and to rethink the role of the human voice in music at a time of serious crisis in polyphonic composition. I am talking in particular about some treatises wrote around 1640, Prognostica Musice, De Prestantia Musice Veteris, De Prestantia Studiorum Musicorum, where we have to revive the ancient modern system of Greek tonoi to the point of developing a practice through studying and technical improvement for singers based on the ancient notation system. These aforementioned works and numerous other works were collected by Doni in an autographed collection which was however published posthumously. The Lira Barberina gave its name to the collection of Doni's complete works, gathered in 2 volumes and published only 1763, well over a century after his death, 160 years after his death. The monumental work was published by the archaeologist Anton Francesco Gori, who had come into possession of a large collection of epigraphs and autographs belonging to Doni. Himself a passionate collector, and in his collection had discovered the manuscripts of Doni's theoretical writings on musical instruments and ancient Greek words. Although he had the first provisional copy of the 2 volumes on Lira Barberina printed, he never managed to complete the work. And upon his death, his colleague archaeologist Giovanni Battista Passeri, at the request of Goris Hayes, decided to finish the work, seeking help from Padre Martini in Bologna for the more strictly musical problems. Father Martini, steam for Doni is well attested in a letter to Passeri containing the 2nd volume of the Lira Barberina and written a year before the publication of the work. Padre Martini wrote about this big scholar. It is not my intention to demonstrate the depth and the extent of the knowledge of this worthy author, since his life has been eruditely described. The vastness of his knowledge in all the science and arts, the quantity and variety of the works he composed, it is not easy to express the depth with which Doni penetrated Greek music, both theoretical and practical, both vocal and instrumental. And as regards Greek musical theory, what diligence, what discoveries it did not make to illustrate it, to demonstrate how much Greek music could be applied to our music. It is interesting to view Lira Barberina summary, summary table of contents, and to skim through the treatises of these 2 volumes, because this overview helps us to focus on the broad spectrum of Donian studies. We see that the first book of the work is divided into 5 parts. The first, entitled Commentari di Lira Barberina, gives its title, above, to the entire work, and thus as its subject the studies carried out by Doni on Greek lyre playing. Inspired by the tripos of Pythagoras of Zacynthus, it's made up of an inverted tripod on which the Lydian, Phrygian, and Dorian intonations could be played. The author demonstrated that the instrument could be perfectly used in modern musical practices. The second part of this volume is the Prestantia Musice Veteris, in which the author insists on the need to reinstate the modes and the genera, repeatedly emphasize the need for a varied and artful melody, suggesting to his readers that modern melodies, especially those of solo vocal music, were for him ineffective because they lacked diversity and are very monotone. He mentions several times in this text the accurate method suggested to singers in the Prognostica Musice, explaining the purpose of his treatise, which is the next one published on the Lyra. progymnastica musice, pax veterum, restituta ad modernam praxi. It's divided into books and reflects the type of treatise in which the theory is programmed to teach, with the aid of a modern semiography, to teach the use of the Greek musical system and its tone and modes by young people who want to learn the art of singing well. The fourth refers to the sacred music recited in the Basilian Academy. The last part of this first book is composed of 5 discorsi, speeches, in a style of debate typical of the intellectual discussion of the Renaissance. One is on the enharmonic genus, the other on instrumenti da tasti, on the synchrony of Divinus Ptolemy, on the disposizione e facilità of the harmonics violence, and the last on the perfect chord in violence. Let's also briefly look at the contents of the second volume of the work. The main part of this volume is the Musica Scenica, treatise on scenic music, which he dedicates to the history and use of music on stage. The second part is made up of a series of lessons held by the author at the Papal Court and at the Accademia della Crusca. They range from the way the ancients represented tragedies and comedies to how to represent dramatic actions in music, in whole or in part, until an interpretation of Latin verses rhythmopeia, and concludes with a fragment of an anonymous treatise on stage machinery. The third part contains speeches, observations, and letters by the author and other musicologists of his time, like Bardi, Caccini. This short overview reveals Doni to us as an authoritative and prolific author on ancient Greek music, who entered the debate opened by Girolamo Mei in his treatises De Modis, Vincenzo Galilei in his Dialogo della musica antica e della musica moderna, e by Niccolò Vicentino in the treatise L'antica musica ridotta alla moderna pratica. In first volume of the Lira, of Doni's Lira, main interest is the knowledge of notation system and the relationship between intervals, of which he also wants to study the semiography, referring to the tables of Alypius with all the notation signs of the 50 modal scales in each of the 3 genera. And it is to illustrate the ancient musical system and its diagram that in the same year as the Annotazioni sopra il convegno dei generi dei modi 6040, he wrote Progymnastica Musice, presenting it as a preparatory part for the music of the ancients, restored and edited according to modern practice. This little-known treatise is structured into volumes. Its propedeutic approach is clear from the title, Progymnastica, a term known in the late Hellenistic context applied to rhetoric. The progymnasmata, preliminary exercise, in Latin pre-exercitamina, were exercises intended for students of rhetoric. The purpose of those exercises was to prepare students for writing declamation after completing their grammatical studies. There are only 4 surviving manuals of progymnasmata attributed to Aelius Theon, Hermogenes of Tarsus, Aftonius, and Nicholas the Sophist. The title tells us that the author's theoretical explanation is aimed at helping young singers learn the ancient music and how they can practice to perform it. In the De Prestantia Musicae Veteris, written 6 years after the Progymnastica, there was mentioned that the prognostica is a work worthy of having shown how the ancient Greek carried out the first musical apprenticeship with effective singing training. In the Estancia in book 2, we read the prognostica musicae also deserves to be mentioned with some merit. We hope indeed that the work by our Doni, in Latin or French, of this hypothesis will soon come to light, where it claims to show with great clarity how the ancient Greeks carried out the first musical tirocinium apprenticeship and the exercise of singing in a more appropriate and convenient way than the more recent Latins, according to the teaching of old Guido. Guido d'Arezzo is very criticized from Doni. We see later why. The prognostica musicae also deserved yes, here he refers to the solmization system of Guido d'Arezzo, strongly opposed by Doni, as we will see later. Then explain how the Greek notation plays a pivotal role to train optimi cantores. Notation is to investigate from its origins, explained through the sources of ancient theories, and transcribed with the signs of the new semiography. Doni describes the musical system and relating them to modern notation, reporting a Livius diagram with their respective nomenclatures, both the Greek one and the Latin one of Boethius. The aim is to demonstrate how the Greek system can be much more effective, particularly for young people who are preparing to accompany the melody with their voice and to modulate the song following the prognostic syllabus, in which more effective way than the Guidonian solmization, which is much more obscure, confused, and tiring than the ancient Greek one. His aim is therefore of a pedagogical nature, convinced that only the return to the system of ancient modes and genera can form singers who are more skilled and less degenerate than those of his time. We can read, I believe you know that the ancient Greeks and the Romans, following their example, used certain notes for writing songs, which they call diagrammata. This consists of the letters of the Greek alphabet itself, though they varied in many ways. For, as we learn from Alypius, the Greek writer, they were distributed in all three genera and 50 tones. 2 letters were assigned to each sound. Sound is phthongos, sound of voice, phthongos, and chord, from instrumental in each system. According to the ancient method, it seems to be that it could have been more advantageous for boys to practice singing, paying attention to exercise or to modulate the song according to propedeutic syllabus than by the modern method, which uses the syllabus of the Guidonian system more than is necessary and without adding any diagram to each single line and their spaces. The refers to the Guidonian hand and the esaccordo, and it's more confused and difficult for young singers than the old Greek method. And Doni criticism and recommendation suggest certain skills and vocal practices he expects competent singers to have perfected, and then just they show the voice, parting his beliefs in a somewhat different form. Doni also enumerates 4 qualities that he requires in a good singer. First, skill in singing the intervals and difficult one. 2, the ability to use embellishments. 3, elegance and grace. 4, sweet sweetness of voice given by nature and perfected by practice. He does not believe that these qualities, with exception of the gift of sweet voice, dolcezza della voce, is a very important word for the recitar cantando, but he insists to the sweetness of voice. It's a very important element for the recitar cantando. And Doni says he don't believe that these qualities, with exception, okay. Sweet of voice can innate, but have to be developed through long, serious studies and self-discipline. So Doni wrote the Prognostica to introduce to the theory and practice of Greek music, and he illustrated the systema. Here is the definition of the skills. Therefore, the exact and perfect method of singing seems to consist mainly of 4 things. First, skill in singing any intervals, even more difficult ones, then ornamentation, that is the embellishment of songs which the best singers use more or less. Third, elegance or certain grace and beauty which sometimes shines out even in the simple songs. Finally, the sweetness of the voice, which arises mainly from natural strength, but is perfected by art and practice. And in the Prognostica Musica introduction, in libro Vetus Systema Musicum, Iusque diagramma proponitur atque illustratur, nove questionographiae species afferuntur. Here, Doni speak about the systema and wrote, since system especially necessary for musician, it seems appropriate that some things should be said about it. Therefore, system in the present case, that is in the treatment of music, is a comprehension of more than 2 intervals, for so it is defined by Aristides Quintilianus. Therefore, the system will contain at least 4 voices per chord. But besides other species of systems, which the ancient musicians filled, that which they properly called the maximum and perfectum, so sistema teleona metabolon, no? Sistema perfetto immutabile, consisting of 15 voices or chords, pentecachordum, or of 2 diapason, was most frequently in use among them. The individual chords and voice of these were indicated by their proper terms and their notes, or by certain signs most aptly devised for that purpose. So Doni wrote refers to Aristides Quintiliano to give the correct definition of systema minimum or tetrachord, and to bring the notation system back to musical praxis. Then moving on to the systema maximum or perfectum, consisting of 15 voices, like in Alicius' tables. He then explains in detail where the nomenclature of notes comes from, linking it to the position of strings on the lyre and attributing the octave to that tongue. While the 15-note system, this diapason, had been suggested by the natural extension of the voice up to 2 octaves. Also, the diapason comes from instrument, from lyre, and the system of 15 tones, 15 notes, was suggested by voice, by the natural extension of voice. First, then it is necessary to note that the arranging of the system and the nomenclatures were originated on the example of the ancient lyra, that is made the same progress with it, and that the notes of the system were designated by same name, by which in ancient times the names of the lyras were called. For example, heptachord, lyras, system heptachord, or two tetrachords or the eight diapason from the eight chords. From an ancient lyre, the fourth pounder was heptachord and consisted of two conjoined tetrachord, suoi, which make a minor seventh from E to D. But the pounder, by adding a single string, completed the whole diapason, to which others afterwards, as is usual, gradually completed by new strings, added such that the lyre might consist of 9, 10, 11, 15, 18, and more sounds. For the present, it has sufficed for us to describe the perfect diapason system, which by the consent of the ancient musician has been accepted as sufficient and absolute in every part, and to show its order and wonderful artifice, and to clarify the nomenclatures which may seem a little more obscure. And about the 15 notes system, you wrote, but that for the treatment, teaching, and practice of music, that this diapason system is rightly used cannot be denied. For if we consider human voice as it fitting, since they usually constitute within the full and measure the lowest limit of sharpness and the lowest limit of gravity, this term, as short and certain, was rightly to be said. For although few are found who can conceive the rule 15 voices full and sonorous, so that the most grave one do not go into hoarseness, but the most acute one into stridor. And on the contrary, there are some who can have several degrees of voice with full and sonorous sound. It was nevertheless fair that from what happens most often, not rarely, a certain general rule should be proposed. Also, from the extension of the two diapason, this diapason from voice would suggested that this system is a perfect system of 15 notes. Oh, sorry. And after the explanation of the nomenclature very details, for each individual note of the maximum system, he describes the nature of the three genera. Here is the diagram of the perfect system with the Greek and Latin names of the notes and tetrachords. We see the tetrachord hyperbolaion, the first tetrachord hyperbolaion, tetrachord diazephnemenon, tetrachord meson, and tetrachord hyperbolaion. And the suoi was indicated from same author with an hand, because suoi was used instead of diazephnemenon. And he wrote, the present system is therefore composed of two separate tones and four tetrachords, one of which, the diazephnemenon, of course, can be interchanged with a fifth, which is placed at the side and out of order, the suoi. For they are of such nature that they cannot be placed together, but one is excluded from the other. 4 is the supermelon is inserted between the thirds of melon and the meson, sorry, is, okay, which some of the recent writers do less than is appropriate. I believe for the sake of enlarging the system, certain inconveniences occur with, which cannot be avoided. Okay, misunderstanding of the system. And if you see, he gave the name in Greek and the name in Latin, ultima supremarum, or appunto, and on the right hand indicates the signs, the intervals, tone, 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 semitone, and try to give a very clear diagram from this system maximum. And here we see a page of the manuscript LSD 143 in Bologna, preserved in Bologna, Circo Museo Bibliografico Musicale, where is to see the notation from the old signs and the transcription in the note of Doni, the next study of the notation. But after the explanation, very detailed, I cannot say of the 100 side, 100 page of Doni. After the explanation of the nomenclature for each individual note of the maximum system, it describes the nature of the three general diatonic, chromatic, and enharmonic. To do this, he analyzes the last tetrachord of the maximum system, which goes from the eupate meson to the eupate eupaton. The succession of intervals is illustrated by him as follows. No. Sorry. The first note of the tetrachord eupate, sorry, I have to go back. Okay. The eupate eupaton, paripate eupaton diatonica, licanos eupaton, e eupate meson. And he gives the notes and the intervals, semitone, tone, tone, and semitone, semitone, bitono, bitono, and semitone, no, diesis, diesis, and bitonus. And he say the first note of the tetrachord eupate and the last mese were fixed, while the two intermediate, one paripate and licanos, were movable. Each mode could be of the diatonic genus, where the movable strings were arranged in succession of two-tone intervals of the semitone, in the tone chromatic genus in succession of three semitones, 3 emitonium and 2 semitones, and enharmonic genus in succession of epiton intervals and 2 micro-intervals of appunto diesis. He then goes on to specify how the position of the semitone diatonic genus can determine the tonic mode if the semitone was in the low range, in succession therefore of tone, tone, semitone, according to the descending scale, Phrygian if the semitone was in the medium range, Lydian if the high range, if it was in the upper range. Doni tried to find a connection between the three modes through the licanos-chromaticum. Ecco, no, scusate. So the three genres and the modes of the genres. However, in the part dedicated to the interpretation of modes and tonoi, he speaks about since we have shown elsewhere that the mutations are not proper to genus but to tone or mode, I will show here a very important thing, namely in the connection of successive tones from Dorius to Phrygius to Lydius. In the connection of successive tones, for example, the lower chromatic chord not only responds that is in unison with the upper diatonic index. Licanos is the black notes here, licanos. And the semitone F, mi fa, is in the Dorius down, in the middle in the Phrygius, and upper in the Lydius. And that is in unison with the upper diatonic index licanos sol, but the syllable itself is marked according to this new method as appears from the diagram below, where for the sake of distinction we have colored in black the chromatic sounds, that is the indices, licanos indices, or chromatic licanos sol. And this is a method to connect the three genera in its position, with position, with changed position of semitone. But in the part dedicated to the interpretation of modes and tonoi, he reconnected to the perfect system of 15 tones. Unlike what he states in the Compendio dei Toni e dei Modi, which he wrote at the same time as the Prognostica, here Doni states that the perfect system of 15 tones is the most suitable model of reference for his treatment of musical practice, because in singing the voice very often exceeds the octave. The position is distant from his speculations on modes and tones in the Compendium, in which, instead, he believes that a single octave is sufficient for the treatment of theoretical music, since the voices that exceed the limit of the octave are only repetitions of those contained in the octave. These statements reveal how the practical and theoretical objective change of the practical and theoretical aims change Doni's studies perspective. It is in fact interesting to note how different is the approach to modes and tonoi in their description and interpretation in the two different treatises. An important premise must be made in this regard. In underlining his intent to renew the art of singing, Doni repeatedly emphasized the need for a varied and artful melody, suggesting to his readers that modern melodies, especially those of solo vocal music, require to be made more expressive, and that necessary diversification of melody would be achieved, he thinks, by regard to a correct use of the modes and the use of musical systems as they had been employed by ancient musicians. Doni recognized, as it may, that the central double octave, the Dorian, could be transposed to 6 other keys, making each octave pattern of tones and semitones available at every pitch aid. He lists 3 principal modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, and that's less important fourth, Mixolydian. But the number of modes to which Doni refers is 7, and their octave spaces is characterized by the following representative octaves: Dorian, from A to A. Phrygian from D, Lydian from C, Mixolydian from B, Ecuadorian from A, and Eco-Phrygian from G, Impo-Lydian from F. This is what were the octave species outlined by the Greek authors. What is the diversity that we can find in ancient tonal and modes, and how Doni explained them in the theory and in practice? A comparison is interesting in order to understand the cultural significance of Doni's scholar, rightly defined as a true from Paliska, as a true promoter of Greek ancient tonal system, as a basis for modern practice and modern music. But now let us compare the two descriptions of the modes, the theoretical one of the compendium and the practical one of the prognostica. In his compendium, Doni is interested in explaining the difference in mutation, change between tones and modes, referring to Ptolemy as his main source. And he says two sources of mutations occur with respect to the same tones. One, when we proceed through the melody at the higher or lower pitch, maintaining the entire species the suitable intervals. The other occurs when the pitch of the voice through the melody is not changed, but only through a part of it in keeping with the corresponding intervals of the beginning. This is called mutation of mode rather than of tones. For the modulation of tones, the melody is not varied, but the pitch of the voice is. Through the mutation of mode, however, the harmonia is varied, and we see here, secondo gli antichi, mutazione di modo solo, and mutazione di modo solo, we see the pitch is the same, but we have alteration, fis, and cis, and here is tono dorio, so the same tonos, but modo frigio. And a mutazione di tono suolo, the second example, sorry, no. Ok, non riesco ad andare indietro. Ok, un momento. We see in the second example tono and modulidio because the pitch is another pitch. The B here is fis, and the pitch is another. And in the prognostica musica we see only this diagrammata, diese prima scenografie species, different art of write the modi and the toni with lines, only with lines and with the indication of the notes on the left. And in the Doni text, to explain Doni in prognostica, it wants to adapt the use of mutation to modern praxis, to allow singers to develop a greater vocal quality and a better art in singing. So it purposes a diagram in which, as it tells, it seems much more appropriate, however, leaving aside intervals that the notes be written, be written on sheets of paper only with lines. This This practice, in fact, will have the greatest advantage in terms of convenience and profit, in addition to the fact that the disposition of the single voice is better represented, but it will also obtain with defined and second lines that the sound and their notes firmly connected to each other, always allow an easier vision for the eyes and offer themselves to the imagination of the singers. So more imagination, because it's like only the lines, and they can, between the lines, make improvisation or ornamentation, or they can realize a link between the notes. Furthermore, it will not be less convenient that the harmonic voice, that is, those that change according to the genre or tone, can be placed appropriately in the central spaces between the lines, for alteration, for example. In this way, they perfectly show the mutation of the good harmony. And from the comparison between the two forces, we understand better what Doni means with variety and diversity in the melody of songs. It consists in the ability to train the voice to switch from one pitch or mode to another, with the purpose of giving new colors and nuances to the voice. This mutations is explained to us through diagrams that in the compendium are elaborate and complete, while in the prognostica are illustrated in diagrams with an open form, outlined on sheets only with lines of notes, a scenography suitable for singers prognostes who have to practice, even to improvise between the lines of the melody. In prognostica, he also speaks about emotional variety in melodies that one should pay attention to, since he says that even renowned singers often confuse these emotional spheres with inappropriate melodies. He advises teachers to collect the melodies of the three genres so that the young people can adequately practice this as well. He mentions three types of melody: esicastica, calm and quiet; sistaltica, depressed and sad; and gestaltica, excited and bitter. Doni recommends to give diversity to a melody by taking advantage of the intervals and modes, and there is three ways to use modes in a melody. First, to remain entirely in the same modes; two, to use accidentials, especially semitones, but sparsely; and to move completely from one mode to another. Also, intervals are important to suggest different emotions and sentiments. As regards the modes, Doni underlines the importance of their use, especially for stage music, underlining the emotional quality attributed to each mode. It describes the emotional quality, and says the quality is at least in part to the range associated with it. For example, it says a high range was suitable for excitement, and the lower range for a more depressed affection, for expression of amorous passion, pity, lamentation, and similar affections. A high range was appropriate for a quiet and tranquil state of sound, and middle range to express greatness and active sense of grata, and low range. And this is in says in the discorso sopra la musica antica e il cantarbera. And about intervals and variety and diversity melody, he wrote, one can only note some observations in general, such as this, that almost a very accidental note is universally pathetic and is good to express every affecting sentiment, although properly those that inspire intervals smaller and more narrow than the natural in that place, like the semi-diapente in place of the diapente, or the semi-diatessaron in place of diatessaron, are good to express tender and soft sentiments. And for the opposite, those that inspire larger intervals, like tritons in place of the true fours, true fifth in place of fours, are suitable to express linear and word sentiments. Also, not only modes, but also intervals were very important for emotion in song. And before concluding my paper, a system of syllabic notation. It was very interesting when Massimo spoken about the strongos with consonant and vowel, for the articulation of the song, the importance to articulate well the song with consonant and the presence of consonant vocals. And Doni identifies a system of solmization of syllables that he says techniques used for the practice of singing. What interests him is to understand how would be helping young singers to modulate the voice in a beautiful way, and how to provide a mnemonic aid in learning the melodies to gain greater confidence in declining the text and achieving perfect intonation, perfect pitch intonation. The author presents a form of solmization that he says he found in an anonymous late Greek source found in a Codex of Vatican Library, of which it does not, however, provide us with a number. These are preparatory syllables for singing, articulated according to a precise scheme developed for didactic purpose. In this system, the syllables are ta, do, te with eta and te with epsilon, when repeated in each tetrachord. They do not identify specific degrees of an octave or double octave scale, but only the position of a note in its local sequence. This method can allow young people learning to improve the precision in pitch intonation and clarity in voice articulation. As regards the practice of syllables, Doni strongly recommends that the names of all chords and tetrachords be dotted even with the help of this syllable method, since it is not a matter of great difficulty, and more than one might think useful, indeed necessary, for understanding the true methodism of music. These young students who will do the preliminary exercise indicated by the master for different degrees of progressive difficulty will become young erudite fino musici, these students, who possess carientismos, a witty spirit, because they have learned a lot through the progymnasmata and have trained themselves to take care not only of the form of the melody, but also of the declamation of the words in their individual letters and in the accent, and can translate what they have learned in the monodic style called recitativo style. But how could the music be composed and sung by Filologici according to its presence? Only moment about this diagram con aggiunti syllables. We see here the name of notes and the syllables, and in the Greek codex, a number we don't know, which in addition to other complete releases pertaining to music contain fragments by an anonymous author by excellent workmanship, in which 4 types of syllables are reported: to, ta, te, eta, et epsilon, of which to is attributed to proslambanomenos, likanos, et paranete, ta to the eupathenate paranete, then the letter to Palpatetride, and finally then the epsilon to the mese alone. It should also be noted how appropriately the syllables of only 2 letters are defined, and also with vowels, so that they can pronounce them more quickly and easily with the consonant T, which can be pronounced without any difficulty ever by children. And how could the music be composed and sung by field musicians according to this project? It's for us a very good question. It provides us with a powerful example of a varied melody with a modulation from modes Dorian, from Dorian mode to Lydian mode, deeply chromatic, with the use of voice launched in microtonal scales, il portamento della voce, with these signs here, legature, and that express one of the most passionate passages of Euriali and Nisus and Euriali. Domenico Mazzocchi was a composer, a Roman composer, a contemporary composer of Doni, and wrote many dialoghi di Didone, dialoghi Euriali and Niso. And in this dialogue, there is the cry of Euriali's Mother Euriali. And this is Doni's ideal of ars cavendi music, and he gave us in his Classica Musice the incipit of this lamento. Nunc ego te Euriale aspicio, the mother see the dead son, and is desperate, and this song we see here is the original score of Domenico Mazzocchi, Mater Euriali, cantare ut scribitur rigorose. The singer have to sing like as wrote, like it is written in this music of Domenico Mazzocchi. And this passage is taken from Virgil's Aeneid, and by listening to the cry of Aurelius Mana, we bid farewell to Doni and leave the final word to his ideal of music created by Domenico Mazzocchi and in the dialogo Nisus and Eurialus 1638, the same years of annotazioni al compendio delle annotazioni ad ogni modi e Propinastica Musice. Propinastica Musice began 1614, and this is for 2 years before 1638. Okay, we hear this example.
developer, it takes a scholar with a mastery of Renaissance music and Greek music to tackle such a subject, because this is what we mean when we speak of the cultural heritage of ancient Greek music. And it's always interesting to see how these the fundamental notions of ancient Greek music are reused and reinterpreted by Renaissance and first Baroque theorists and composers. So I'd like to ask if there are questions from the audience.
I was just going to make a comment. If you go back to slide 12, I don't know if you can do that.
Slide 12.
Yeah, slide 12. I think it's helpful to think of tonos. His conception of tonos is simply a window in oral space. So the Dorian tonos is here. The Phrygian tonos is just a whole step up in oral space. The Lydian tonos is another step up in the whole space. That's what he's following. And then the mixed Lydian is a semitono. So the spacing is following the original spacing of the tonoi. But it's just a window in oral space. And whatever mode appears in the window is what he names the mode there. That's the way I understand it. I think that's an easier way to conceptualize it.
Yes, he tried to make easier this diagram, and I think the aim of this treatise was to make easier and to make understand to young students, and he made many diagrammata. There is a diagrammata with 15 lines, for example. In fact, there is a semiografia for Andrea Gabrielli, and linked these diagrams to the music of Andrea Gabrielli, and explain how simple you can see with this modern semiography the thinking of the composer, and he tried to with a quite pedagogical statement to explain how good is the Greek music and how easier than Guido d'Arezzo, for example. This Guido d'Arezzo with a hand, or it's confused. And yes, it's very interesting for me, because this Massimo Musica was excluded from interest of scholar, but I think it's very interesting because open a window, like you say, about the necessity of renew the song, and to renew the song with the knowledge and depth of the theory. And there's a book of history of Greek music here. So concepts, not commodities on the body.
Yeah. I was thinking it's very interesting how this kind of diagram, because to me these diagrams of Donis look pretty much like the ones we find in ancient manuscripts of, for example, Donis. But in that case, the origin of this kind of representation is based on multi-stringed canons, because that lines are actually the representation of strings. Pyramids, yes, because in ancient treatises we have basically two ways of representing notes by means of lines. Lines of different lengths, like in the pseudo-Euclidean sectiocanis, where lengths are to be put in relation with harmonic ratios, and these kind of equal length strings, where different strings are supposed to be tuned differently. Okay.
It's like the chords of the instrument.
Yeah, precisely.
And says it's a line that give the possibility to the singer to improvise, to move.
Yes, and that's extremely interesting. Thanks for bringing that up, because to the eyes of a 16th or 17th century reader, those lines, I think, were not anymore linked to the strings of a multi-stringed canon, but they inevitably reminded of a pentagram. And so it's very interesting how the same kind of symbol can, and in those lines, you have space for imagining improvisation and a movement of the melody.
Dynamis, speak of dynamis, mutationes or dynamis, movement.
So in his treatise, dynamis means movement.
Movement change too.
Okay, so not cetabole, but dynamis. Okay. Speaking of dynamis, this representation is clearly influenced by Ptolemy's doctrine of the seven tonal, because
for example, in the compendium, he says, my source is Ptolemy.
Okay.
And Ptolemy was taken from the modis. The modis studied the Ptolemy theory, and he was inspired from to take the starting point from the treatise in compendium. But in the prognostica musica is another approach to the modes, to the tonal, because it was made easy. It's not a theory for intellectual. It's a practice for practice.
That's interesting, because actually in Ptolemy dynamis means a totally different thing, because it's the dynamic nomenclature of the notes. And speaking of that, that system with tota, teti, probably from Belgrade language, of course, that is a kind of a dynamic notation, a positional notation. It's not the absolute pitch, but the relative position within the text. That's amazing. Thank you. If you don't have any other questions, we can call it, not today, but call it tomorrow. And we will reconvene here this afternoon for our final meeting with Trevor Lawrence, who will be speaking about a cave and how to get out of that cave. Okay? So, see you later.